Ever since I picked up my first controller, I knew that I had found something that I was going to be addicted to and was going to be kind of a huge part of my life. I played a ton of narrative games. You know, you play as a prince and you save princesses and kingdoms, and I really wanted to be able to insert myself into the world that I was playing, and I wanted to be able to relate to the characters that I was playing. And my options were limited when it comes to female characters. Throughout the years, video games have been known to have a lack of representation. Female characters, when they are represented, are over-sexualized or secondary characters, and LGBTQA characters are depicted really negatively. When video games were originally created, they were made to be a fun activity for everyone to enjoy. But the industry has since then been corrupted by marketing that targets boys and men. This has led to a lot of games in the industry being narratives about heroic male characters, and the women in video games held secondary roles, such as the damsel in distress or the victim that needs saving. Female protagonists did start to make a debut, but they are often portrayed as over-sexualized to still make sure that they appeal to the male audience. One of the most iconic early female protagonists is Lara Croft, the Tomb Raider herself. She first appeared in her short shorts and crop top and exaggerated features in 1996 in her debut game. It was a huge success. It sold a lot of copies and a lot of people really enjoyed playing it. The advertising for the second game was a little odd and a little off, and it really just highlighted her sexual appeal, and even some of the videos had a slogan of "Where the boys are," because it shows empty bowling alleys and bars and saying that all the boys are now playing with Lara Croft. Unfortunately, though, Lara is not the only subject of over-sexualization in games. Fighting games have a reputation for making their characters with exaggerated features. In this clip from Street Fighter, we see Chun-Li and Poison fighting while wearing literally next to nothing. It's these outfits that they give them. I don't know who designed them, but they're not realistic for anybody who's in a fight. I mean, I've never been in a fight, but clearly I would not wear that. Another example of an overly sexualized character is Bayonetta. Bayonetta from the Bayonetta series is a strong and independent character, but she's still hypersexualized. She wears a super tight bodysuit that has an open back and an open front that's really revealing, and along with her black high heels. The cover of her game is actually showing her from the back and is highlighting like her hips and curves, and it's actually one of the few gaming covers that doesn't show a character's face at all. The way she moves and attacks in the game is very over-sexual. She even has a move called Climax, which basically she gets naked and all of her stuff is just covered with her hair. She is, however, given a personality. She's witty and she's funny and she's sassy, but I don't think that really compensates for the over-sexualization of her. She is not shown as the typical damsel in distress, but is often actually saving a male or rescuing a male character. And I guess as long as she's not the damsel in distress, it's okay that she's super revealing and over-sexual for no reason. Sure. The demographic of people that play video games is expanding, and therefore the representation should be expanding as well. Everyone deserves to have a voice and be seen and heard in video games in a way that is fair and organic and not forced and negative. Across all media, the LGBT characters that are depicted are often created with only one important characteristic, their sexual preference or identity. These characters in games lack complexity and personality. They are only in the story to be the token diverse character. When we do see this representation in games, the writing can be off-putting and feel really out of place. The LGBTQA community deserves better. In Mass Effect Andromeda, you meet Haley Abrams, and one of her first lines is about how she's trans and used to be called Stefan. When this came out, people were kind of annoyed at how unnatural this voice line felt, and really would have rather found it out organically rather than her just telling you that's the first voice line you hear from her. Because let's be honest, the sexuality is boring, but people are interesting. Many characters don't respect the LGBTQA characters they create enough to just make them a normal character. They are created for media attention, and companies expect a pat on the back for how progressive and inclusive they're being with these characters. Players want to insert themselves into the narrative and action of games. Like any media, we want to find characters that we identify with. The lack of representation for the LGBTQA people in games makes them left out of the sensation that we all want to experience. One game that I think represents a ton of different people in a great way is The Last of Us Part 2. In The Last of Us Part 2, we get the female protagonist, Ellie. She's a fan favorite. People love her. She grew up in a post-apocalyptic environment and is therefore very mature beyond her years. In the story, she's confirmed to be lesbian. She is shown kissing her friend Riley in the earlier part of the franchise, and the trailer for The Last of Us Part 2 that was debuted at E3, the world's biggest gaming event, Ellie is shown kissing Dina. Both of these events are really small in the narrative as a whole, and they're just put into the story. They're not main parts of the story. Ellie is a really complex character with a lot of personality and intelligence. People who play the games like Ellie and remember Ellie for who she is as a character, not because of her sexual preferences. Another character that we get in The Last of Us Part 2 is Abby. She is portrayed as physically strong and muscular, which is a great contrast to the overly sexualized female characters we often see. She is another complex female character who evolves throughout the narrative. In this game, we also get Lev. He plays a pivotal role in the story and is a trans character. He grew up in the Seraphite cult, which is like a really overly religious kind of cult that really hounds in on the roles of males and females. Lev, who was born Lily, wanted to be a soldier, but he was actually assigned to be the wife of an elder. It was then he really decided that was enough, and he shaved his head and changed his name to Lev and was exiled from the cult. Without giving any spoilers of the game, he eventually meets up with Abby and stops her from taking revenge and killing another character, and he really saves Abby from herself. This, in my opinion, is the single most heroic act in the game and has nothing to do with gender identity, but everything to do with who he really is as a person. It's really easy to look at these examples from The Last of Us Part 2 and say, well, that covers everything. Games have plenty of representation. There you go. But it's really not that simple. In an industry that is determined to put people in boxes and positions where the defaults are white, straight, cis, and male, representation is important and helps people feel seen and heard and find themselves. The demographic of people who play games is no longer just teenage boys. It's people from all genders, all ethnicities, religions, sexualities, and all walks of life. Every single person that plays games deserves to be able to play a game that respectfully and accurately depicts a character that they can relate to in some way. Long story short, representation in games does matter, and the fight for this representation won't go away until it's addressed and fixed.